Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week on a couple of different reasons. First of which is just to allow you, the viewer, who have stumbled across this for whatever reason, to gain some different insight into the assigned gospel text for the week. And the second reason that I do these is just to take my brain out of the mode of processing and background work. And because I like coffee, I always call it percolation mode, and actually move into the mode of writing and preparing a sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. So those are the two reasons that I do these videos. One is selfish for myself and my own benefit, and the other is for you who are watching it to be benefited by it, hopefully. This particular weekend, which is March 27th, 2016, significant because A, we're at the end of March already, and holy smokestack, where's the year going? And also significant because it is Resurrection of our Lord Sunday, aka Easter Sunday. Lent is coming to a close, and actually technically already has, and we are finding ourselves at the glorious resurrection of Jesus Christ and the celebration of that. As I record this, it is currently Friday, aka Good Friday, and as you can see over here, the sun is still shining as it's daytime. Later on this evening, we'll have Good Friday worship when we walk through the Passion of Christ and experience that along with Him. And then the quiet of Saturday is coming up, and then we jump into the glorious resurrection first thing Sunday morning. So that is kind of where we are at in the season. Of course, always an exciting time and a joyful time. I oftentimes call Easter Sunday the Super Bowl here in the Christian church because this is when God's victory over the powers of sin and death is achieved and is revealed. So that's kind of where we are at and what is happening. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right on in. As I mentioned, here the text for Easter Sunday comes from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12. Lectionary has us in the year of Luke this year, so it is Luke's turn to encounter the story of the resurrection. Now, every year, there's also the option of substituting John's account of the resurrection. Of course, I'm not doing that. I'm preaching out of Luke or using Luke's account, and that's fine. But this is one of those where we always have that option, and maybe one of these years I'll actually follow through with it. Maybe next year, because this is the third year that I've been within my congregation at the third Easter, and so this will cover the basis, and maybe next year I'll use John, but who knows? That's foreshadowing. All that being said, let's jump in. One thing, quick note that I am thinking and probably am going to do is I'm also going to include the two verses at the end of chapter 23 because they kind of really set the tone for what's happening and the ongoing kind of nature of this narrative. So I'm going to include those as well, just an FYI why I'm starting there. So starting with 23, verse 55. And this is right after the death of Jesus and when he's been taken down off the cross. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath day they rested according to the commandment. Okay, so Jesus is dead, taken down off the tomb. The women are watching, and from a distance they see where he is laid. They see how he is, where his body is put. There can be no doubt that these women know where it is, and I include that for the specific notion of let there be no mistake. They knew where they were going. So when they went to the tomb on Sunday morning, they didn't go to the wrong place. Okay, now picking up in chapter 24. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, same tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared on Friday. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, idle tale. I'll come back to it. And they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. And then he went home, amazed at what had happened. And drop the curtain. Okay, so that is the story of the resurrection. Now, of course, this being one of the central moments within within the story of Jesus or the gospel of Christ, of course, the resurrection is featured in all four gospels. Differences, as per usual, when we have the same story in different gospels, different details. We have differences in terms of which women were there, how many women were there, the differences of their reaction, the difference of how many angels were there, where were the angels, did the women go in the tomb, did they not go in the tomb, did Jesus actually appear to them, did he not appear to them, did Peter go to the tomb by himself, did he not even go, did another disciple go with him? All of these things are some of the differences that occur. But of course, the major thing that happens is women go to the tomb in the morning, having observed the Sabbath. The tomb is empty. Angels proclaim, they encounter angels and are told essentially variation on the terms. He's not here. Why do you look for him among the dead? But remember what he told you. Go tell his disciples. And they run off. Now, sometimes they go and tell the disciples. In Mark's account, they don't. They just run away because they're terrified, and they don't say anything to anyone, and that's kind of mind-blowing because that's the ending of Mark's gospel right there. But that was last year, so we're not worried about that now. So there's all of that stuff going on. And in Matthew's account, when they're going to tell the disciples, they actually encounter Jesus. In John's account, it's Mary Magdalene by herself. And she sees the empty tomb. She runs off and tells the disciples. Then Peter and the other disciple run and find the tomb, and then they leave. And then Mary's still there, and she's confused. And then she sees the angel, and then she turns around and sees Jesus. So sometimes we hear that the women who are present actually encounter Jesus. Sometimes we don't. Mark, we don't. And here in Luke, we don't. So that's kind of an interesting notion. And where I'm really going with this, and this may actually be kind of a short brain dump, although I'm 7.5 minutes into it already. As I think about this and think about the notion of the empty tomb, and which is something that we cannot explain. We just can't explain it away. Now, Jesus has raised 3 individuals from death. He raised others. Lazarus was one. The daughter of Jairus was another, and the widow at Nain was the other. So he raised 3 people. We also have 1 or 2 examples in the Old Testament, I think maybe just one, when one of the prophets actually raises someone from death as well. So there are a few scriptural accounts of being raised, but never the quote-unquote resurrection that Jesus is experiencing. And but all logic tells us that death is it, that death is the end in terms of life. And so when this is going on, all we can think of is he's dead, he's in the tomb, and that's it. But that's not the case, because as the women go to the tomb, the same tomb they saw him laid in, and now he's not there, all we have is the empty tomb. And then we have a proclamation of hey, he's not here. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is raised, as he told you. Remember his words. Then they remember his words, and they go and tell. Now, I bring all of this up because of the notion that that they don't witness the risen Lord here. All the evidence they have is proclamation and an empty grave. Likewise, that's what we have. And I'm skipping over to John's gospel now, when John tells his disciples after the fact, after the resurrection, he says, you believe because you have seen, but blessed are those who have not seen yet come to believe. That's who we are. We can't even find the empty grave because we don't know exactly where it's at. People over in the Holy Land will tell you they know where it's at, but no, they don't. They don't know exactly where it is. So we have an empty grave. We basically have no body. And we have the proclamation. And here on Easter, that's what we have. Now, it's interesting. When we really think about the story of the resurrection, there's a lot of ambiguity in there. And half of them don't even feature the risen Lord. And it's not until later that we actually see them. Now, again, here in Luke, we have that. we have the resurrection appearances that happen after the fact. We have the road to Emmaus, which is a pretty familiar story. We hear at the tail end of that at some point during the day, on the day of Easter, he's appeared to Peter, though we have no narrative of that. And then he appears to all the disciples as they're together in the locked room. And that's just here in Luke. And then there's other moments as well of appearances. So there are instances and stories of the resurrected Lord, but we don't have it. We don't see it. For us, we have the empty grave where there once was death, there is no more. And we have the proclamation. So we are a lot like the women. So the real question here becomes, how do we respond? Do we respond like the women did? And do we go and tell? Or do we respond like the women did in Mark's gospel and we run away because we can't make heads or tails of it and we're so terrified? Another point that I want to make, and I said that I was going to come back to it. When the women run off and tell the disciples, the women have believed the proclamation. They believe in the resurrection and what has happened. But they go off and we hear that the disciples dismiss them because it sounds like an idle tale. In the Greek, that idle tale, it only appears once, right here in the entire New Testament. It's the only time it's used. And scholars kind of best place it. Idle tale is a really nice PC way of saying that the disciples thought it was a load of crap, aka they called bullshit. Like, the Lord is risen. Yeah, bullshit. He's dead. We know he is. Pardon my French. But that's what's going on. And as we see, the disciples don't believe him. And it's not until Jesus appears to them as individuals or in the group, they almost have to be convinced of it. We have the two disciples on the road to Emmaus who encounter the risen Lord, don't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. Then their eyes are open and they recognize him. We have him appearing before in the locked room when everyone's like, oh gosh, it's a ghost, and they're freaking out. And he's like, no, it's not a ghost. It's me. Look, see the nails in my hands. Look, give me some food. I'll eat it. I'm not a ghost. He has to convince them. As I think about all of this, that really speaks to the notion of faith and the folly that Christianity poses to non-believers. You believe in a dude who said he was God and then he died and then he was alive again. And just as I talked about earlier, death is it. Dead is dead. And yet God shows us through this that there is more. So, oftentimes we have encountered perhaps ourselves the reaction of, yeah, right. It's not computing. I'm calling BS on that. But yet faith comes in, and that which is unbelievable for us becomes believable. And likewise, just like the women, the evidence we have is an empty grave. The evidence we have is the proclamation, nothing more. So do we believe it and do we go and tell, or do we not? That's what's happening here in this text. It's an exciting one. Easter, always a great one, always a joyful time, one that I love. I hope that this season of Lent and Holy Week and now into Easter has been one that you've been able to endure. I pray that God has blessed you during this time. No video from me next week. I'll actually be gone on vacation, so look for another brain dump coming up in a couple of weeks again as we get farther into the season of Easter. Otherwise, God bless, and we'll catch you next time.